Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MetrObelisk Radio. Today we are looking at Terminator Genisys. This is the first entry in the series that is a straight up reboot of the entire franchise. Doing a reboot in any series, especially one with time travel, is really risky. It can either work out very well for you and you receive all these accolades and praise from the fans and critics alike, blah, 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 blah. Or the opposite could happen in the sense that it could crash and burn and kill the entire series retroactively. So, what camp does this movie fall into? Deserving of praise or a total crash and burn? Now, before we get started, remember to follow the blog, MetrObeliskRadio.blogspot.com, where you can stay up to date on all Metrobelisk Radio uploads, no matter if they're exclusive to the platform that you are currently watching or listening to this on. Now, with that out of the way, let's take a look at Terminator Genisys. Now, before that we do a deep dive into this movie, I want to tackle the rights issue again. Now, at the time of Terminator Salvation, the fifth movie, the sequel to it, was put on hold due to legal troubles with the Halcyon Company. They filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in August of 2009. Now, for those of you that don't know what Chapter 11 bankruptcy is, that just means restructuring. Basically, the debt will stop accruing, but you still have to pay back all of the creditors. And whenever you see a company file for bankruptcy, quote unquote, they're usually filing Chapter 11. It's very rare that they file Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is always seen as an absolute last resort. For those listening, if you remember the Toys R Us fiasco when they filed for bankruptcy, they initially filed Chapter 11, but still ultimately closed because they still couldn't pay back the creditors. That's what Chapter 11 bankruptcy is. Now, Halcyon decided to just sell the Terminator rights to avoid outright bankruptcy, and they valued the Terminator rights at the time at $70 million. Now, Halcyon purchased the Terminator rights back in 2007, and Salvation came out in 2009. Now, this selling of the rights was probably as a result of that $200 million budget allocated for Terminator Salvation. Probably didn't work out for them. Now, on February 8th, 2010, the Terminator rights went up for auction, and Pacificor, that was a hedge fund, purchased the rights for $29.2 million. Now, this did absolve Halcyon's debt with Pacificor, and it guaranteed Halcyon $5 million for each additional Terminator sequel produced to pay the other outstanding debts. Now, Pacificor sold the rights again in 2010, and the rights would be picked up by Megan Ellison and her company Annapurna Pictures in May 2011 after they purchased the rights to make at least 2 more Terminator films. Now, most of you might be wondering why James Cameron is not stepping in to buy back the rights again. Is it just his ego? Is it that he's done? Well, not really, and we're going to get into that in just a quick second. Now, the deal with Annapurna was finalized on December 4th, 2012, and the final price was actually lower than the auction pledge because of new copyright laws that have raised concerns that the Terminator rights were going to revert back to James Cameron in 2019, which they did. And Ellison's brother, David Ellison, who owns Skydance, agreed to co-produce the movies, and Skydance had a distribution deal with Paramount. And believe it or not, Justin Lin was originally attached to direct this movie, but had to drop out because of the shooting schedule on Fast and Furious 6. And other filmmakers like Rian Johnson, Denis Villeneuve, and Ang Lee were approached, but Alan Taylor was ultimately chosen over those 3. Now, to close this section off, this is the reason why Skydance and Paramount wanted to rush out the Genisys sequels, because no matter how much money those movies made or how well they were received, the rights would revert back to James Cameron in 2019. So essentially, James Cameron was just playing the waiting game. Why is he going to pay millions of dollars for something that he's going to get for free just a few years down the road? Now let's actually start diving into the movie, and as always, we start off with the creative team. Now, this movie was directed by Alan Taylor, as I just stated. If you're a fan of television, and more specifically HBO, you've probably heard or seen this name. He's directed episodes of Oz, 6 Feet Under, The Sopranos, Sex and the City, Boardwalk Empire, and Game of Thrones. He's also the director of the MCU movie Thor: The Dark World. And there were 2 writers on this movie, and we're going to start with the first one. These 2 are not a writing duo. We have, and I'm going to butcher this name, I'm going to let you know in advance, Lita Kalogridis. And again, I've only seen the name written, I've never heard it pronounced. She was the creator of the Birds of Prey TV series that was on the CW, well, the WB back then, that only lasted for 13 episodes. Recently, she's created the science fiction series Altered Carbon for Netflix, and the movies that she's written are Alexander with Colin Farrell, Pathfinder with Carl Urban, Shutter Island with Leonardo DiCaprio, and was a writer on Alita Battle Angel with Christoph Waltz and Rosa Salazar. And the second and last writer on this movie is Patrick Lussier. Now, he only has 6 writing credits to his name, including this movie. Now, other movies that he's written are Dracula 2000, along with its sequels, Dracula 2 Ascension, and Dracula 3 Legacy, Drive Angry with Nicolas Cage and Amber Heard, and Trick with Omar Epps. Now let's dive into the character analysis portion of this, and we're going to start with Arnold Schwarzenegger as Pops. Now, he's another T-800 Model 101 that was sent back in time, but instead of protecting John Connor, it was to protect Sarah Connor at a very young age. Then we have Emilia Clarke as Sarah Connor. Now, obviously a far cry from Linda Hamilton. And the only real problem that I have with Emilia Clarke taking on the role of Sarah Connor is she's just too tiny. Number one, she's only 5'3", and she's a very petite girl. Now, I get that you have to suspend your disbelief when it comes to action movies, but they make her more like a man in the movie rather than a woman. And a perfect example is at one point in the movie, the bus that she's driving goes into the San Francisco Bay. She jumps and grabs onto Pops, but then she's holding on to Kyle Reese by her other arm. Now, Emilia Clarke looks like she weighs no more than 115, 120 pounds. So she can hold on to someone twice her weight without that other person slipping. Because you take one look at Emilia Clarke and it looks like she doesn't really hit the gym. At least she doesn't really hit the weights. So you're telling me she can hang on to someone who's maybe 2 times her weight? I understand suspending your disbelief, but that's going a little too far for me. Next, we have Jai Courtney as Kyle Reese. Now, unfortunately, when you hear people complaining that he was emasculated in this movie, they actually have a point. I don't mind the fact that Sarah Connor was expecting his arrival and saved his ass at one point, and she's a little, rougher and gruffer. There's a right way to do that, and there's a wrong way to do that. Now, very shortly into this movie, there's a perception that he's just the albatross around Sarah Connor's neck at one point. Then we have Bing Hun Lee as the T-1000, and now he's only in the movie for the first hour in 1984, and the timeline is different when Kyle Reese gets back to 1984. In the original movie, he takes the cop's gun and asks the cop, "What day is it? What year?" And the cop simply replies, 1984. In this movie, that cop was the T-1000, also expecting his arrival. He's sent back to kill Kyle Reese, but Kyle Reese was so poorly executed that this moment of the movie means nothing by the end. Why does Skynet want Kyle Reese dead? And I'll expand on that in a minute. Then we have Jason Clarke as John Connor, and he's actually the villain of the movie. He got compromised in the future by Skynet. They injected something in him that changes him into a Terminator at the cellular level, and it's a great idea, especially given that this is a reboot. Instead of now being the leader of the human resistance, he would become an agent of Skynet. And finally, we have J.K. Simmons as O'Brien. Now, I only bring him up here because of something that I'm going to state at the end. He was a cop in LA back in 1984. He saw the T-1000 and decided to devote his life to study these quote-unquote time-traveling robots from the future. Now let's take a look at this movie narratively. Now, this movie narratively is obviously a reboot, as I stated. Kyle Reese is still sent back to 1984, but when he was in the process of being transported to 1984, the timeline had changed. John Connor was compromised, and as a result, Kyle Reese was being pulled between 2 different timelines. He was now seeing visions of a young boy saying that he can stop Skynet from happening if he goes to San Francisco in October 2017, and remember, Genisys is Skynet. Now, he still comes back to Los Angeles in 1984, and it's known very quickly that this is an alternate 1984. Sarah Connor with Pops goes to kill the T-800 that came back in the first movie. Kyle Reese steals the homeless guy's pants, and then he steals the cop's gun, but the cop turns out to be the T-1000, something that obviously didn't happen in the original movie, and basically Sarah Connor had been expecting Kyle Reese's arrival for some time. Now, instead of Judgment Day happening in 1997, because Sarah Connor and Pops killed that first T-800 and didn't leave any traces behind, there was no microprocessor and no Terminator arm for Miles Dyson to recover. Therefore, Terminator 2 didn't happen. And if Terminator 2 doesn't happen, Terminator 3 doesn't happen. So Judgment Day gets pushed forward even further into the future, into 2017, the magical year of 2017, with the launch of a new operating system called Genisys. And here's where I believe that the filmmakers were really taking potshots at Microsoft here. Danny Dyson, the kid from Terminator 2, now head of Cyberdyne, said that pre-orders for Genisys have surpassed 1 billion units. Now, most of you listening to this probably don't know, don't remember, or don't really give a shit. But when Windows 10 was about to launch, Microsoft's goal back in 2014, 2015 was to ship 1 billion units of Windows 10 worldwide. Now, you may be wondering, how can there be an alternate timeline? A T-1000 was sent back in time when Sarah Connor was much younger and Pops was programmed to be her protector. So who sent Pops back in time? The simple answer is, we don't know. The files were erased, meaning that the person who sent him back doesn't want anyone to know, including Skynet, because Skynet would try to kill him if they found out, to prevent Pops from going back and protecting Sarah Connor. So had that not happened, John Connor doesn't get compromised. Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor still get a little busy. John Connor's born, Kyle Reese is dead. Terminator 2 happens, Terminator 3 happens, Judgment Day happens in 2003. And so by the end of the movie, Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese shut down Genisys, and Pops doesn't die. He just gets an upgrade. The first Terminator movie where Arnold Schwarzenegger does not die. So if the sequel ever happened, it would be the first time that Arnold would play the same character in 2 Terminator movies. Also, Pops, quote-unquote, kills John Connor. However, I feel they would have brought back Jason Clarke's John Connor for the sequels, because as the old saying goes, where there's a will, there's a way. Now let's take a look at how this movie was received. Now, this movie has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 27% based on 268 critic reviews, with the critics' consensus being, quote, mired in its muddled mythology, Terminator Genisys is a lurching retread that lacks the thematic depth, conceptual intelligence, or visual thrills that launched this once mighty franchise, end quote. And this movie has an audience score of 53% based on 82,454 audience reviews. And this movie has a Metacritic score of 38 based on 41 critic reviews, and a user score of 5.9 out of 10 based on 1,314 ratings. And this movie sets on IMDb at 6.3 out of 10 based on 254,831 reviews. Now, this movie was made on a budget of $155 million. And if we adjust that for inflation in 2020 dollars, that's a budget of $159,442,086.43. And the movie grossed $440,603,537 worldwide. Now, adjusted for inflation in 2020 dollars, that is a worldwide gross of $481,656,661.93. Now, James Cameron did voice his support for this movie when it initially came out. He described it as respectful to the first 2 movies, and he even went as far as to say, quote, the franchise has been reinvigorated. However, in 2017, he said that he only voiced support of it because of his friendship with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, are you starting to notice a pattern with James Cameron at this point? Look, I know that I ragged on the characters of Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor. However, I don't believe that they were damaged beyond repair. I can see how Sarah Connor would act the way she acts, knowing that this is a different timeline. This is the way that reboots should be handled, especially if they involve time travel. Don't just rehash the first movie. Just create an alternate timeline where the first movie never happened. Now, the same thing happened with the 2009 Star Trek movie, if you remember that. Kirk's father was never supposed to die, and because Kirk's father died, all of a sudden, all the character motivations just changed. Now, before I drag this on for too long, I'm going to end the episode off with this. There were sequels planned. However, with poor box office returns, Paramount/Skydance removed the sequels from the production schedule. The sequels had release dates of May 19th, 2017 for the second movie, and the third movie would release on June 29th, 2018. The sequels were going to be shot back-to-back over a 9-month period, and they would have featured who sent Pops back to protect Sarah Connor, essentially the person who altered the timeline. J.K. Simmons would have served a bigger role, and Danny Dyson would at least have been a bigger role in the second movie. The second movie was set to focus on John Connor's life after becoming part machine, so yes, John Connor was coming back. Jason Clarke said about the Genisys sequel, quote, "What I remember was that second one was going to be about John's journey after he was taken by Skynet, like going down to what he became, half machine, half man. That's where the second one was going to start, and that's about all I knew. It's such a bummer we didn't get to do that," end quote. And it's a real shame that we never got the sequels. The writers didn't have to stick to what the original trilogy did, since this is an alternate timeline. It's a branching timeline, and one where Kyle Reese was protected from the same way that the Enterprise was protected in Star Trek First Contact. Because they followed the Borg and were caught in their jet stream, they were unaffected by the changing timeline. This series of movies could have ended with a successful prevention of Judgment Day, knowing that John Connor would now become an agent of Skynet. They wouldn't have to build to John Connor's existence. They could move away from it if they really wanted to. Remember, this is an alternate timeline that has no bearing on Terminator 1, Terminator 2, and Terminator 3, and even Salvation for that matter.